In February of 1959, a chilling tragedy unfolded on the icy slopes of a remote Russian mountain. A group of young hikers, full of energy and ambition, set out on what was supposed to be an adventure of a lifetime. Instead, it became one of the world's most baffling mysteries, an event so strange and unsettling that decades later, investigators, scientists, and storytellers are still trying to make sense of it. This story is known today as the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and even now the answers remain elusive. The late winter sun was sinking toward the horizon as two young men trudged up a snow-covered hill. They were weary, exhausted from days of searching, in the freezing Russian wilderness. The cold bit into their skin, but their determination kept them moving. These men were students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, and they were searching for their missing friends, fellow students who had vanished during a long hiking expedition 2 weeks earlier. As daylight began to fade, they considered turning back. The thought of navigating through this unforgiving landscape in total darkness was dangerous. Still, they pressed on, unwilling to abandon the search. At first, all they could see was endless white snow stretching across the mountainside, but then, something dark caught their attention. It stood out sharply against the pristine landscape, an odd shape halfway up the slope. With a spark of hope and dread, they moved closer. What they found was a tent. It was half buried in snow, with a large gash ripped down one side of the canvas. This was no ordinary tier. It looked as though someone had cut their way out from the inside. The men recognized it instantly as the tent belonging to their missing companions. Inside, the scene was strange and unsettling. Personal belongings were left behind: coats, boots, food supplies, journals, even an axe and a saw. The tent floor was covered with blankets and padded clothing, all arranged neatly as though the hikers had expected to return. Yet there were no people, no bodies, only silence. Relieved that they had not found their friends dead inside the tent, the searchers still couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. They had no idea that this discovery was just the beginning of a mystery that would haunt the world for decades. In the days that followed, the missing hikers began to be found, but the circumstances of their deaths defied explanation. Nothing about the scene added up. The case was quickly closed without clear answers, and for over 30 years the official files were locked away in government archives, hidden from public view. When those records were finally released in the BSR 1990s, the world was stunned. Russian citizens had heard whispers of the tragedy, but now the full scope of the bizarre circumstances came to light. International attention exploded in the late 2000s as the story spread across the internet, from forums and blogs to YouTube videos. Many people think they already know this story, but the truth is far stranger and more complex than the simplified versions passed around online. Tonight, let's revisit this incident, step by step, fact by fact. No exaggerations, no unnecessary embellishments. Only the haunting reality of what really happened on that mountain in 1959. The story starts in January of 1959. 10 companions, 9 of them students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute and one an older ex-military man, planned a winter trek across the Siberian wilderness. Each of them was an experienced outdoorsman, rated by their institute as Grade 2 hikers. Completing this expedition would earn them the highest possible certification, Grade 3, which would qualify them as instructors. Their leader was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a brilliant radio engineering student and a natural leader. Many of his peers admired him, and being selected to join one of his expeditions was considered an honor. The group's goal was ambitious: to cover nearly 300 miles of harsh terrain and reach the peak of Mount Otorten in the northern Ural Mountains. All accounts, the group was excited and in high spirits as they set out. They gathered at the train station in Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, their heavy backpacks loaded with skis, tents, and food supplies. None of them could have imagined that this would be their final adventure. Only one of the 10 hikers would survive, but not because of the mountain. His name was Yuri Yudin, and he turned back early due to health problems. Though disappointed at the time, this decision spared his life. Thanks to him, we know much of what happened in the first days of the journey. On January 23, 1959, the group boarded an overnight train heading north. Their journey lasted 11 hours before they arrived in the town of Serov. The following day, they traveled onward, stopping at small villages along the way. They even entertained local schoolchildren during one of their stops, playing music and telling stories, their spirits still high. On January 25th, they boarded a bus further north, then continued by truck to an area called Sector 41. There, they spent the night in the cold. 2 days later, on January 27th, the hikers moved deeper into the wilderness, following frozen rivers through forests and valleys. That same day, Yuri Yudin, struggling with chronic health issues, said goodbye to his companions and turned back. He had no idea that this would be the last time he would ever see them alive. From that moment on, everything we know comes from the journals, photographs, and supplies left behind by the group. On January 29th, the hikers pushed northward, skiing, along the frozen Lozva River. They camped on its banks, battling the bitter cold. The next day, they followed the river's tributary, the Auspia, westward toward a mountain known only by its map number, 1079. This peak was known to the local Mansi people as Kholat Shakhl, the Dead Mountain. Legends told of hunters who never returned from its slopes, and the name alone carried a sense of foreboding. On January 31st, the group cached extra supplies in the forest at the base of the mountain, lightening their loads for the climb ahead. Then on February 1st, they began their final ascent. The weather turned against them. Strong winds howled across the slopes, and visibility dropped in the snowstorm. Straying off course, they found themselves high on the side of the mountain as daylight faded. Instead of turning back to the shelter of the forest, Dyatlov made a fateful decision. They would camp on the slope. Perhaps he wanted to test their endurance in harsher conditions. Perhaps he thought they had made too much progress to lose. Whatever his reasoning, the group pitched their tent on the barren, exposed mountainside. Photographs taken that evening show the hikers laughing, smiling, and working together to set up camp. They even produced a playful handwritten newsletter, mocking their misadventures and boosting morale. Spirits seemed high despite the grueling conditions, but something happened later that night, something no one has ever been able to fully explain. From the evidence recovered later, investigators pieced together a chilling sequence of events. Sometime during the night of February 1st, the hikers cut their way out of the tent and fled into the freezing darkness. They weren't wearing proper clothing. Most had only underwear, socks, or a single shoe. Some were barefoot. Temperatures that night dropped to 25 to 30 degrees Celsius. Exposure alone would have been fatal. Yet some of the bodies showed injuries that could not be explained by hypothermia. 9 hikers went out into the snow that night. None returned alive. Back home, the hikers were expected to return by February 13th. When they did not, their families grew anxious. At first, no one panicked. Delays were common. Dyatlov himself had warned that the journey might take longer. But by February 15th, relatives were alarmed. Still no telegrams, no word. On February 20th, families demanded action. A search party was organized, made up of fellow students, teachers, and local volunteers. Soon the Soviet military joined in, bringing planes and helicopters to sweep the vast wilderness. It wasn't until February 26th that searchers finally found the tent. It was collapsed, slashed open, and partially buried in snow. Inside, the hikers' belongings were neatly arranged. It looked as though they had left in a hurry, but why? The next day, the horror deepened. The first bodies were discovered not far from the tent. More would soon follow. The nightmare of the Dyatlov Pass Incident had begun to unfold. What happened that night? Why did 9 experienced hikers abandon their shelter in sub-zero temperatures without proper clothing? Why did some of them suffer fatal internal injuries without external wounds? And what could have possibly driven them into the darkness of the Dead Mountain? These questions would puzzle investigators for decades. The official inquiry gave no satisfactory explanation, and the case was buried in secrecy for years. To this day, No theory has been able to fully account for every piece of evidence. The story of the Dyatlov Pass is not just about the tragedy of 9 young lives lost. It is about the enduring mystery of what truly happened on that mountain slope in 1959.